How are you, Alan? Thank you for doing this.
I'm doing fine, and you're quite welcome.
So I kind of want to just get a high-level overview of your life. Where were you born? When were you born? What's your background?
Well, I was born on September 16th in 1946 in the Oakland County, in the county hospital in Oakland, California. And grew up in the Bay Area and lived, I think we moved to San Leandro when I was 5. It's a suburb of Oakland.
Okay.
And I lived in San Leandro till I went in the Navy in 1964. And 1964 was just the beginnings of Vietnam. And it was like, I don't want to be in the Army, so I'm going to join the Navy because I want to have a bed to sleep in. And then the irony was I ended up on an Army base in Germany. And they had Air Force and later Marines replaced the Air Force. I worked in Naval Security Group. And I can say this now, I couldn't for many years, but I essentially was a Morse code intercept operator, an electronic spy, copying Morse transmissions from the Eastern Bloc countries, primarily Poland. In fact, it was funny, I got a citation, I got an award that was classified top secret. So it's like, I got this award, I can't tell anybody. But I only spent 3 years, and I got out just before my 21st birthday in 1967, came home to the summer of love. And when you're in the military, particularly in Europe, the only news we had was Stars and Stripes. So it's pretty pro-war and pretty slanted. And of course, the summer of love was anti-war, and I had a real problem with that. And then a kid that had been a year behind me in school got killed in Vietnam. And it kind of stopped me in my tracks. I thought, why did he die? And I couldn't think of a reason. And I kind of became anti-war after that. And I've come to, this is probably 5 decades now that I've felt that war is the ultimate obscenity. That when you go to war, it means that all of these capabilities we have as human beings have failed. And we've accepted this outrageous alternative of killing each other. Just insanity. So that kind of shaped my life, coming to that attitude. But so I've for the last 2 decades, or at least, I've used a word to describe my life, and that word is serendipity. I've had no plan for my life. I've had 6 careers. I have a low boredom threshold, obviously, and I've just seized opportunities when they presented themselves. And my first job when I got out of the Navy was I worked in a fish and poultry market. Actually, that was my second job. My first job was only a month long, and it was flipping hamburgers. But my boss was a Marine, ex-Marine, and he and I did not get along very well because sailors and Marines were totally cut from a different cloth. I mean, the old adage is you tell a Marine to jump, they'd jump. You tell a sailor to jump, and they say, why would I want to do that? I mean, maybe I can get a ladder or stand on a chair or something.
Right.
And I worked with and for Marines, so I lived that reality for a little over a year. But I went to work at a fish and poultry market. It wasn't a great job. It was, but it was a job. And then I got my first office job. I was married at the time. I got married very young. And a friend of my father-in-law's worked for a steel company, very small steel service center. Got me a job as an inside salesman. So they had a plan. It was a great plan. They had a guy who was 64. They had 2 inside sales positions. He had one of them. I took the other. He was going to train me for a year and then retire. So, the first day in the job, you learn where the coffee is and where the men's room is. Second day I show up, he's not there. He's in the hospital. He died that night.
Oh, whoa.
So I was the inside sales force. So needless to say, my learning curve was very sharp. All I knew about steel was that it was hard. If you kick it, you'll hurt your foot. But I learned very quickly. And then not too long after that, the owner of the company died, and they had another company that he owned in San Francisco. And I went to work there. And it was like going back into the 19th century. When we brought our electric typewriter over, that was the only electric typewriter they had. They had ancient rotary calculators. They sent orders to the warehouse in a wooden dumbwaiter with a rope pulley.
Wow.
In the men's room, they didn't have paper towels. They had a nail with your name under it, and twice a week they would hang a clean towel on it. I got a tour of one of the warehouses. It was dug out in tunnels in Potrero Hill with strung bare light bulbs.
Wow.
And I thought, man, I don't want to be down here in an earthquake. And I didn't work there for very long. The guy who had gotten me my initial job got me a job with Gilmore Steel. It was a service center with a number of branches, and I got a job in their Stockton office. And I just grew a lot. I worked there for a couple of years. I was pretty full of myself at that time. And there was an opening for a promotion. I didn't get it, and I thought I should have it. I mean, it went to a guy with, 15 years experience. I had 3. So I went to work for another competitor. And then about 9 months later, they had a cutback, and I got laid off. So I went out and sold nuts and bolts for this company that I found later to be pretty disreputable. So I quit that and got my first job that turned into a management job. I went to work for a division of a company owned by North American Phillips. It was my first multinational. And I grew a lot in that job. It was funny. I had much longer hair and wore kind of flowered shirts, and everybody else, the managers, wore ties and whatnot. And I worked for this guy who was just an incredible mentor. He was a classic type A personality. But what was unusual about him is that he didn't expect other people to do it. And he was a very spiritual guy, which is a really odd combination. And I remember when they were setting up meetings with the New York executives were coming out to visit. And I was making fun of them because they were rehearsing it. And I said things like, well, maybe you should put footsteps on the floor so you'll know where to step. And then they looked at me, and And we got to get him to wear something else. And my boss said, that would be dishonest. This is the way he dresses. And so I had a lot of respect for him. And I did a good job. So, I had that going for me. And then I learned this valuable lesson that held me in good stead for the rest of my life. I grew up in an age where you had loyalty to the company. You got a job, you stayed there, you retired. Well, one day we get the announcement they're closing the plant. That's it. We're moving it to North Carolina. And I looked around and, there were people 50, 60 years old. They've been there a long time. And I thought, what are they going to do? I mean, I'm 24, 25. I don't care. In fact, they offered me a job in North Carolina, and I went back there. And it's a town of 2,000. I don't think I can survive here. So I said thanks, but no thanks. And the lesson I learned was, my loyalty is I do a good day's work for a good day's pay. And tomorrow we start over. That's what I owe you. That's what they owe me. Nothing more. That kind of loyalty, that's illusory. It's somebody's idea of a perfect world, but it's not the real world. So then I dropped out for a while. Went to school, went to the beach, collected VA, unemployment. Did that for about a year and a half. It was great. Wrote poetry. It was a good time. And then, reality set in. I had to go get a job. And then I got this job. I made a phone call that changed my life. Because I can draw a line from that phone call to becoming a lawyer with many, many years later. I saw an ad in the paper for a customer service job. I thought, man, this is perfect for me. I've been manager, customer service, industrial supply, big. It was also a multinational, Liquid Air Corporation. And I called, and it was a blind ad, so I didn't know who to call. So I found out the name of the person, and I called and asked for him, and said, yeah, I'm just calling. You had that opening. He said, it's too bad. I just made a decision. I said, that's too bad, because I think I'd have been perfect for this job. So we talked on the phone for an hour, and he said, are you doing anything this afternoon? And I said, no. He said, well, come on down. Let's talk. And we talked for about an hour and a half, and he said, this was in Union City, California. He said, why don't you go over and look at the branch? It's the smallest branch the company has. And if you like the layout, the job's yours. So I took a drive, called him up, said, yeah, I'll take the job. And I did pretty well initially with that company. I ran that branch. It was just me and a truck driver. And then they had a totally dysfunctional branch in San Diego. And they asked me if I would go down there and clean it up. So I said, okay. So I moved to San Diego, actually El Cajon. And I became the most unpopular guy in the building within 2 weeks. When I got there, they were all working an average of 16 hours a week of overtime.
Wow.
And within 2 weeks, there was no overtime. Because they did everything wrong that you could possibly do. They didn't even file paper properly. Everything was a mess. So it wasn't like you need to be a genius to fix this. It was pretty straightforward stuff. And stuff that had been in my background that I I mean, one thing I left out is when I was 15, I got my first job, and I worked at a seafood restaurant for my first mentor. And he taught me everything I know about business. And
At 15, wow.
yeah, he was a remarkable guy. We shared a birthday, except he was 40 years older than me.
Wow.
There are some aphorisms that I'll never forget, like, people may not know why they like this place, they'll never forget why they don't. If you're not proud of what's on the plate you're serving, don't serve it. He was doing quality before quality became a program. It was a way of life there. And that's how I learned to work. So all of that carried forward. And so I cleaned that branch up. I started a management trainee program, recruited a couple people from colleges. They went through the program, became managers. And then they offered me a job that I was totally unsuited for. They thought I was. They made me regional credit manager. I knew nothing about being a credit manager. And then they sat down and told me how they wanted me to approach the job. And as it turned out, they told me all wrong. So I was spending time in the wrong place. And I literally failed at the job. And then I was on a Chapter 11 creditors committee in Oregon, and I met a guy that ran a credit association. And we hit it off, and I went to work for them. I quit this job. I probably quit it ahead of getting fired, but, I knew I wasn't succeeding. And then I started to learn about credit. This is commercial credit, but I started to learn. And then the irony of ironies is I started to teach it in seminars. But I started a bankruptcy service that was unique, that we would go into bankruptcy court and for a fee, review the bankruptcy file and give the creditor a report. And then if they chose, they could hire us to represent them on the creditors committee. And I did that for a while. And then my company merged with the Board of Trade of San Francisco. And I set everything up, and then they made some decisions. It's like, yeah, we really like what you set up, but we're not going to do that for a while. So I decided to leave, started a consulting business. So I'm going to back up a little bit. In the interim in there, while I was going to school, I needed a humanities unit, and there was an acting class. It was a humanities unit. So I took it. And I loved it. I mean, I was jealous of all of my friends. They sang, they played musical instruments, they acted, they did that. I didn't have any art form. And I found my art form. And I started a theater company. And it was, the only thing I had going for me was naivete. I had no idea what I was doing. So I didn't know what I didn't know, which allowed me to go forward and do this thing, okay? While I was working for Liquid Air as a credit manager, Proposition 13 passed, which in California immediately lowered property tax costs. And so a lot of governmental agencies had cut back. And in San Leandro, the county had put a courthouse in that they didn't want to put in because It was political. The first thing they announced, they're shutting it. It's a very small 2-courtroom courthouse. And I got a call from the recreation department. They said, we want you to put in a proposal to lease one of the courtrooms for $1 a year for your theater, because it was homeless at that time. So I did, and I got it.
Wow.
And then about the time I left Liquid Air and started with the Credit Association, I mounted the first production. I produced the first production there. It was an instant success. But I mean, I started with no money. I didn't have any money at all. It's like, why would you do this, okay? This makes no sense. So out of the blue, one of my board members is a former principal at high school. And he said, I just met with a former classmate of yours. She's very wealthy and she wants to meet with you. So I met with her. She underwrote our first production.
Wow, that's cool.
Yeah. So I did that there in that theater for 3 years, and then I had a tragedy. A stagehand fall off a ladder and get killed. And that just took the wind out of my sails. I wanted to shut it down. Cooler heads prevailed, but I took a year to transition out. I got people to take my place and various things that I did, and I walked away. Now, it lasted another 20, 25 years, 22 years, whatever. And I said that I had been acting a little bit. I'd been in 5 plays, and even one in my own theater. And here's the funny thing. I start the theater company because I wanted to have something where I didn't have to audition. The only play that I was in my theater company, I auditioned for the part. Because I thought, if we're going to have any artistic integrity, I have to. So, anyway. I started this consulting business doing this bankruptcy consulting and met a lot of bankruptcy attorneys. In fact, I spent a lot of time in court. Got to know judges, got to know trustees, and lawyers. People always said, you ought to be a lawyer. And the world's got enough lawyers. Besides, I didn't have money to go to law school. So I ran that business, and then I got recruited back by the Board of Trade. They'd fired, or the vice president quit, and so I went to work as vice president. Because right about that time, the niche market that I had in bankruptcy was evaporating. I worked on small to mid-size Chapter 11s, and they were disappearing. So it's like, okay, one door closes, another door opens. And so I went to the Board of Trade. And then we were having some funny, it was not in great financial shape. It was 113 years old, but the reason why the two companies had merged was they had very poor management. They had money, but they had no management. So anyway, when I got there, with better management, but the money was going away. And the president and I sat down one day and said, this company can't afford both of us. So I think I should leave. And he said, okay. So he went to Europe on vacation. Loma Prieta earthquake happened. That noon, there was a board meeting. I presented my resignation to the board. And I left to drive to Lodi to go to a meeting. And then the earthquake happened. I didn't even know it happened until I pulled into the restaurant where we were having the meeting, and the TV's on, and somebody comes running out of the room yelling, Bay Bridge collapsed. And I was like, what are you talking about? So I just turned around and drove home. Phone couldn't get through on the phones, and finally got into Pleasanton, pulled into a hotel where a woman that I had just met, I knew she was at a meeting, and I used the phone, called my family and my mom, and everybody was fine. So anyway, went to visit the building, and there was no electricity in the building. The building had been retrofitted, so it was standing. It was strong. I mean, there was some, big shelf fell down, whatever. But then I get a call from one of the board members, and they said, well, we had a vote after that meeting, and we decided not to accept your resignation, and we voted to ask the president for his resignation and make you president.
Whoa.
And I thought, now that president, he had been a mentor of mine. He had been really good to me. So I really had a real conflict. And I had a partner in my consulting business, a silent partner as an attorney. So I called him and I said, I don't know what to do. And he said, okay, just take a step back and do what's best for the company. And I said, well, I think what's best for the company is to have me as president, but, so I went ahead and did it.
Wow.
Now, I know he's always thought that I engineered that. He had that thought, and there's nothing I can do to disabuse him of that notion, and other people did too, but that isn't the history of it. So then I became president and CEO of a 113-year-old company that was on the brink of bankruptcy.
Wow.
And I ran it for a few months and realized, I'm a bankruptcy professional. I know what I'm looking at, and what I'm looking at is not sustainable. So I called the president of a company called Credit Management Association, which was the largest of its kind, a competitor, and suggested that we talk about merging, which we did. And I became executive vice president of that company running the Northern California division, and did that for a few years, and then left and went back to consulting. And then a funny thing happened. There was a guy that I had talked to on the phone, and we had a very poor conversation. It ended up, he didn't like me, and I didn't like him, and he ran a business that did two things. It collected receivables, portfolios for corporations and for law firms. And he also did bank audits. But we didn't like each other. So a mutual friend who's an attorney insisted that we sit down and talk. I said, all right, fine, we'll make him happy. We'll go to lunch. So we had a 2.5-hour lunch. And I had developed an approach to interviews where I didn't wait for people to ask me questions. I just told them what I was about. Here's what I do, here's what I think, here's my ethics, here's my approach to business. Because my thought was, if they ask me the question and I answer, and they don't know whether I'm formulating an answer to tell them what they want to hear. So I'll just tell them what I'm about. And if they don't like it, then we'll say goodbye and go home. Well, we're walking back to his office, and he said, you doing anything tomorrow? And I said, no. He says, well, how about you come work on a project? And I worked with him for 7 years. He actually, at one point, formed an LLC. I became a member. And now, right at that time, for the 50th time, somebody said, "Why don't you go to law school?" And my wife, who is my third wife, was teaching at John F. Kennedy University. She was chair of the Master's in Management program. And they had a law school. And I looked at the program, and because I looked at I didn't have an undergraduate degree. I had 2 years of college. But this law school would accept me in the law school with only 2 years of college. And because she worked there, I would get tuition waiver. So I signed up for law school. Now the irony is, I'm kind of anal and I'm pretty meticulous. And I've always thought through major decisions, okay? Pros, cons, whatever. I didn't do that in this case. And I realized later, had I done it, I would have said, this is not doable. This is going to take way more effort and energy than I have. But because I didn't do that analysis, I went to law school.
Enter serendipity.
Yeah. And so I started working, collecting receivables in big law firms. So I was getting 2 educations, because what I came to figure out pretty quickly is that every problem that a law firm has with a client becomes a receivable problem. So I was getting a graduate education in law firm management while I was going to law school, where they never talk about law firm management. They don't do it. They don't mention it. So I went to law school 3/4 time at night. It was a 4-year program. And, but I had no intention of being a lawyer. I mean, I never made more money than I was making at this consulting firm. That's the most money I ever made. But I really didn't like the work all that much. But, it was really good money. So 2001 was a really good year. 2002 was a down year. And we met to talk about what to do. And, that meant letting people go. And my wife said, "Why don't you start practicing law?" And I said, "Well, I could do that because I have a law license now. But I'd be starting from scratch. So this would be a huge cut in income." And she says, "So what? We'll get a second on the house." So I told my partner, "Why don't I leave?" And, so I left the firm. And unfortunately, I was right. My income dropped 85%. And I only had one thing going for me. I mean, I knew the law a bit, but I knew a lot of people. And I could call some of the best bankruptcy attorneys in the country for advice, and they would take my calls and give me advice. So that gave me the chutzpah to open this practice. And I was a solo for about 3 or 4 years. Slowly but surely built my income back up. I never got to where I was as a consultant, but I got to 6 figures again. And then lawyers will do this, talking to other lawyers about forming partnerships. And it was kind of funny because I talked to 2 lawyers, and then we brought in a 4th, And then the original two dropped out, and another one came in, and the three of us knew each other because we worked in the pro bono committee for the local bar association. So we started a partnership. And I remember one attorney said, "I don't know how you guys are going to survive because you all do pro bono." And I said, "Well, we'll manage." And then one of the partners we asked to leave, but we brought on two more, and then end up a fifth. But and with the pro bono, we were doing a lot of pro bono. In fact, I created a tool to manage the time because we decided that we would allocate 15% of our resources to pro bono. And I regularly checked the tool, and we were pretty much always at 20%. And the problem is with pro bono is all of the cases are attractive because there's so much need. But it's like, you got to pay the bills, So I used the tool as an objective way to say no, because everybody's got a compelling case. And I expanded my practice area from bankruptcy to include elder financial abuse. And I've never had a more stressful job than that. But I've never had a job that felt so rewarding. Every one of our clients were in distress, either financially or emotionally or both. And, we had the ability to help people. That felt good. It wasn't easy. It was hard work. And that's how I spent my day every day, with people who were having a crisis. And so part of my stress management was, for many years, I got up at 4:30 in the morning and went to the gym. And that helped. That was my stress management. But it was tough on my marriage because I went to bed at 7:30. So, but anyway, I did that for a number of years. And then I got divorced from my third wife. And I'm really pleased we're still really good friends. In fact, we've agreed that our divorce saved our friendship. In fact, I talked to her yesterday, and she and my daughter are going to fly out in September and visit me. So that's great. But in 2014, somebody said, "So you told me that one of these days you're going to go back to acting. What's up with that?" And I said, "Well, right now it's a thought. It's not a plan. I still have the thought." And then one of my partners said, he called a meeting and he said, "I want to talk about what we're going to do for the next 5 years." So we set the meeting time and date. And I just started thinking. And it was a 10-minute meeting, because I opened the meeting by saying, and I was managing partner of the firm. So I said, I'm going to be leaving the firm at the end of the year, the end of 2014. And I'm going to pursue an acting career. This makes no sense, at 68. And it was funny, I got this email, and it talked about a workshop for actors. And it was about how to overcome obstacles and, how to move forward and, with your life. And it was a free workshop. And I knew, the free workshop is only a prelude to a paid workshop. But I'm sitting in this free workshop and I'm thinking, I know they're going to come with the ask. How much would I pay for this? And I thought, I'll pay $2,000 for this. Well, it was a free workshop leading up to a $1,000 workshop for the weekend. And I looked at my calendar and miraculously it was clear. So I went to this workshop and it really changed things for me because there were two things. One, I didn't learn at all because they were teaching quantum physics and I don't understand any of it, but they tried to teach me. But the thing that stuck was the idea that your brain only has one job, and that is to keep you safe. So when you hear a big truck horn, it tells you to stay on the sidewalk. And when somebody has a bad idea, it tells you to stop and think, okay? And I was getting a lot of those messages from my brain about my plans. It's like, you're too old, you don't have any money, this makes no sense. An acting career, really? There's thousands of people doing that. There's nothing that makes any sense with this. And one of the takeaways from this is I created a mantra for myself. Whenever my brain would send me such a message, I would say, oh, that's just my brain doing its job. Thank you. Appreciate it, but no thank you. I'm going to do this. And that just got me through a whole lot of stuff. So then, they also gave me the advice, because I was thinking of doing it in the Bay Area. And they said, you really need to go to LA. You got to go where the fish are biting. And there's a community in the Bay Area, but it's relatively small. So I moved to LA. I kind of cashed in whatever retirement money I had and sold my life insurance policy. And I had enough money for a year. And I ended up being down there 3 years. I had 150 auditions in those 3 years. I was in 30 shoots, mostly small films. I was in an episode of Masters of Sex. And if you don't blink, for about 4 seconds, you can see the top of my head and hear my voice. But I got a co-star credit, and I made $2,000. And I became SAG eligible. So, and then I did a national commercial, which is on YouTube.
What's the commercial?
It's for GrandPad. It's an iPad for elders. And the episode is called Marma Baby. And it's still on YouTube right now. Now, that was not a union gig, so I didn't get residuals. But I did make $2,200 for that. So I had 2 paydays while I was down there. I did a lot of $100, $125 shoots, and I did some student films, and I consider it successful in that I got to do what I wanted to do. I didn't make a living at it, and most people don't. It's a brutal business. The numbers, this isn't a hard and fast number, but it's a typical number. For every co-star role are about 3,000 submissions. And about 20 to 40 people get called in. And of that, about 5 get called back. and one person gets the role. So 2,999 people get rejected. That's the reality of the business. And you have to get really square with that. And I did. I mean, I talked to a lot of people when I first got down there and got really good advice. And so, I considered it a positive experience. But I borrowed from my bankruptcy work because one of the things that I had always advised people is to keep a very detailed budget. And with my Chapter 11 clients, I developed a spreadsheet that projected cash for a year or two out. So I kept that meticulously. And I looked at it one day and it's like, you will run out of money in a year. So I can't do that. So I was looking around, looked at a bunch of different places, including Albuquerque, because I'd visited here. My ex-wife and my daughter lived here, so I knew it. And decided to move here. So 7 years ago, I moved to Albuquerque.
That's probably right about when I met you, maybe shortly thereafter.
Yeah. And my plan was to continue acting. But when I got here, I had a conversation with myself about what does that mean? And I realized, I was putting in a lot of effort. I was in class twice a week. I was, driving all around LA for auditions. And I just decided, I don't have the energy for that anymore. But I did appear in one play here in Albuquerque for the Duke City Rep. Every year they do a barn crawl at Shakespearean beer pubs. And it was the most unique acting experience I've ever had. So it was started in Chicago, and there's some ground rules. No rehearsals. One rehearsal, No director. And every performance is in a different beer pub. So the blocking, the movement, you make it up on the fly. Because you're in and amongst the patrons, you're not on a stage. And I played the Prince. I don't know if you know the play, but I've kind of figured out he was like a mafia don because he had the power of life and death over people. But I played him as kind of a benevolent ruler, but I knew I could sentence someone to death. There was a reviewer that said I lent gravitas to the production. Anyway, I really enjoyed that. And there was this magic moment when the woman who played Juliet, and when Juliet drinks the vial of poison, she said to the audience, "Please don't let me do this alone." And the audience raised the glass and they all drank with her. And the other cool thing was that about half of the people came to see the play. But the other half of the people, they came to have a beer. And I would imagine if you asked them, would you like to see a Shakespeare play? They would say no. By the end of the play, everybody was into it. And they got to discover that Shakespeare wrote for the people. He didn't write for the wealthy, highfalutin folks. He just wrote for the folks. And so it was a great experience. And I'll never forget it. But that was my only experience acting in Albuquerque. So my time in Albuquerque, I developed this philosophy that I've got all the time in the world, but not a moment to waste. So, and the other thing that I learned in LA, I remember sitting on a set for about a C movie. I was background, just sitting waiting for someone to tell me to do something. And I looked around, and there was like a beehive of activities, people all over the place. And I went, wow, there's all this going on, and I'm not responsible for any of it. Just me. And I love it. I mean, for all of my professional life, I'd mostly been in positions of responsibility. And I was okay with it. I liked being in charge. I liked being responsible. But at that moment, I realized it's really cool not to be. So while I've been in Albuquerque, I've served on a couple of boards, but only for a year or so. I was on the board of Wheels, and I was on the board of the Albuquerque Theater. What was the Albuquerque Theater Association? Something like that. But then the pandemic came along, and it was like, I'm tailor-made for that. Because my greatest skill is doing nothing. I'm really good at it. It's like I'm a couch potato, and all of a sudden it's a patriotic act, you know? And I had no anxiety. I had no loneliness. I'm perfectly set up for that. Now, since then, one of the things I did early on was I joined the League of Women Voters, and they wanted me to be on the board, and I said no. I don't need to be on the board. So I served on a couple committees, and I still participate. And then my daughter, last February, that was February of last year, she and her mom moved from Placitas to Orange County. And she had been volunteering at a food bank. It's called MoGrow. It's for movable growers. And she really liked it. So she said, I really think you'd enjoy this. So I said, okay. So we went together. And it's a unique food bank because people don't go there. They pack food for organizations that distribute food. And it was 1 day a week, 2 hours. It was like perfect for me. Although I did have an interesting experience my first day. We had a break. So I went in the break room, and this lady came and asked me about my background. I've been asked that question a lot in my life. So I start talking. And all of a sudden, word salad is coming out of my mouth. I'm trying to say something, and none of those words are coming out. I'm talking, but the words don't make sense. And she said, well, I think I got to get back. And she left. And it's lasted about 20 seconds or so. And then it was fine. So I went in when I told my daughter, and I said, I'm fine now. So when I got home, I looked up strokes. And I sent an email to my doctor. And she wrote back and said, go to the ER now. Went to the ER, they ran a bunch of tests, and the best they could determine was I had a TIA. It was a transient ischemic attack. Apparently a little platelet or something broke off and attached itself to my brain and then got knocked off. So while it was attached to my brain, I was incoherent. It was the weirdest experience I had before I had this experience, this latest experience. But anyway, I never had a reoccurrence of it. And, I've been fine. That part of my body's been fine, fortunately. But I really enjoyed working at the food bank. And there were two things that I said every day when I got there to myself. God, I'm glad this place is here. God, I'm sad this place is here. It just brought home this incredible need that people in our community have for food. I mean, food insecurity is rampant. College students that don't have enough food to eat. Children who don't have enough food to eat. It's in a country this rich, that's a tragedy. Mm-hmm. So anyway, I felt like I did my little part to with the problem. And then in December, so go back, step back a little bit. The last 4 elections, I worked the elections. I worked early elections. And it was hard on this old body. I mean, it's working 14 out of 18 days. The day starts at 9:30 and ends at 7:30. And then election day was a 12-hour day. No, 15-hour day. It was pretty hard. And the last one, you've read all about. They had same-day registration and whatnot. That was a 17-hour day. Well, I didn't know what was going on, but I'd had swelling in my legs. And I thought it was from, being on my feet, working.
Sure.
And then it didn't go away. So I called my doctor. I went in and saw her, and she ran blood tests on Friday. She called me first thing Monday morning. She said, I want you to go to the ER immediately. I said, really? She said, yes, right now, just go. So I went to the ER, and it turned out that my prostate had swelled so much it was doing damage to my kidneys. And so I was almost a week in the hospital, and pretty weak when I got out. But my kidneys recovered, which is good. But they did a PSA test after that. And then my urologist called me in, or had an appointment, and he walked in and said, I think you may have cancer. And I said, so what do we do now? He said, well, we'll do a biopsy. So, I don't know, 3-4 weeks later, I had a biopsy. Confirmed I had cancer. And so they set up a scan to confirm that. Well, and I'll never forget the date, March 19th, this year, I woke up and I was very, very unsteady on my feet. I had a pair of crutches. And I thought, well, I'll use these to get around. I ran some errands, I parked my car, got out, made a slip with the crutches, and I fell. But it was the slowest fall in my life. I kind of slid down the side of my car. But I couldn't get up. I was so weak I could not get up. And here I am in the parking lot. Well, this young lady, within a minute, driving by, she had been visiting her friend. She saw me and stopped. And a neighbor who I'd never met came out about the same time. And they both helped me up and helped me to my apartment. And my neighbor was very gracious. She said, I'll give you my phone number. You need anything, you just call me. Thank you. And so the first irony is I always lock my door. I didn't that day. And my door has 2 locks, and only one of them is accessible from the outside. But I didn't lock my door. So 20 minutes later, I'm sitting at my table, and without any warning, I start to vomit. And I start to fall out of my chair. And I reached out, and I grabbed a low bookcase, which was kind of a mistake because it was very unstable. And I fell, and I pulled the bookcase over on me. So I had a bunch of books on top of me. Second irony, I could reach my phone. So I called my neighbor, and I called 911. She got there first. Got books off of me, helped me up, and went and sat on my couch. And fire department got there. It took them a while because they couldn't find my place. Ambulance got there. They were great. Took me to the hospital. First thing they do, of course, draw blood. And they determined I had sepsis. So I don't know if you know about sepsis, but it's essentially poisoning in the bloodstream. It will kill you. And if I didn't get help, I could have died under that pile of books. So, second little irony. First day let's go chronologically. They said, we're going to do a CT scan. Come out, CT scan. You have 2 kidney stones, and we confirmed you have stage 4 cancer, prostate cancer. So that's all in one afternoon. Sepsis, stones, cancer. It's like, wow, this is a bit to digest. Now, off camera, I told you about my really good friend Danielle. I had called and left a message, told her I was going to the hospital. And when they put me in the ER room, there's no ability, the phone won't receive messages. So she kept trying to call me, she couldn't reach me. Turns out she decided just to go to the hospital. So when they were wheeling me into pre-op, turned the corner and there's Danielle. It's like, this is so cool. The person that I trust the most with my health care issues, just there. And she stayed through the surgery and talked to me when they were done. And so now we come to the second irony. The day nurse, the next day, we're just talking. He said, how did you come to be here? So I'm telling him the story, falling in the parking lot. He said, oh my God, that young lady who helped you is my daughter.
Whoa.
Wow, this is a Rod Serling moment. So I was in the hospital for about 5 or 6 days, and then they transferred me to a skilled nursing facility. My care has been excellent. The food, on the other hand, was terrible. But my care, I really feel fortunate that I got such great care. I read a lot about people who can't even get care, but I've just been really fortunate. And then through Medicare, the plan that I have, they had some home care. People came to visit me for 9 weeks. And so that's been pretty cool. But the sepsis left me very, very weak. And I'm still kind of unsteady on my feet. But slowly but surely, I'm regaining my strength. And The biggest thing for me has been my emotional and my attitude. So in 2005, my son was living in Maryland. He was in the Army, and we went to visit him. And walking around Washington, D.C., I had a shortness of breath. And when we came home, all kinds of tests. They all came up negative. And when that happens, people have a tendency, I know I did, my mind was working overtime with the what ifs, driving myself crazy. But I had this epiphany. It was like, you know what? That doesn't matter, okay? We're alive as long as we're alive. I might have a day, a week, a month, a year, 10 years, 20 years, who knows? What I got to do is be alive while I'm alive and just appreciate the day and not worry about it. All of the stuff takes care of itself. And then a month later, no, not a month later, excuse me, 4 years later, I was having, I couldn't walk a half a block without stopping. And I went to see my doctor, and she sent me for a stress test. I had to stop the stress test. They took the report to the cardiologist, and they took me into surgery from the stress test. And I had my first 2 stents put in my heart. So I came really close to having a heart attack. Unfortunately, they over-medicated me. And a month later, I was in my rented condo. My daughter was staying with me at the time for a week, fortunately, because I passed out. And I stopped the fall by hitting my head on the door jamb. Ended up with 22 stitches and a broken nose, but I woke up in a pool of blood. So, of course, I immediately channeled my mother and said, I have to bleed in the sink. So I got up and went to the sink and was bleeding in the sink, called my daughter, and she came, and she was only 16 at the time. And I said, I was very calm. I said, call 911, call my law partner, and he'll tell you what to do. And she did. She called 911 and called my law partner. And she cleaned up the mess, which I feel to this day, I feel bad about her having to do that. But in the ambulance on the way to the hospital, I had no idea what was going on. I just knew I was in a pool of blood, and the thought popped in my head, is this it? And my reaction was, okay. So it was like, the 4 years earlier, I had this epiphany, but that was an intellectual process, okay? The experience I just had was an emotional one. That told me where I really was, that I really had adopted that attitude. And I see the way I've dealt with this as an extension of that attitude, that I think I've expressed this to you before, but I've had one person who tried to start a conversation with, could you have caught this earlier? And I said, I'm not having that conversation. It's of absolutely no value to me. I am where I am. That's my reality. That's what I need to deal with. And so far, it's gone better than I could have hoped. I mean, my PSA and numbers, and so for anyone watching this that doesn't know, a PSA number of 0 to 4 or 5 is normal and good. 6 is high. My PSA in December was 175.
Whoa.
And then in April, it was 45. And then I saw my oncologist, and he gave me hormone treatment med, And after a month on that, my PSA was 2.4. And then he added a second one, and a month later, my PSA is now 0.1. So, I haven't had to have chemo and haven't done radiation. Now, there's no cure for it. And I mean, I really like this oncologist, and mostly because he's a straight shooter and he can't decode anything. I mean, he walked in, introduced himself, said, I read your file. You have stage 4 cancer and there's no cure. But we can do things that'll prolong your life. I said, okay, I can do that. Now, my friend Danielle has been at every one of my oncology visits with me. And for that, I'm eternally grateful because, she understands the language and has asked questions that I wouldn't think to ask. So she's really made this process, work for me. So I mean, this may sound, I don't know what it'll sound. I consider myself lucky. Okay. I mean, yeah, I got cancer. I've got 5 stents in my heart. I've got asthma and type 2 diabetes. But other than that, I'm doing fine. Okay. I was telling a friend of mine the other day, I said, all things considered, I probably should have collected stamps instead of maladies. Would have been a lot more beneficial. But, it is what it is. And I managed to live almost 79 years, and I may live a few more. And so I'm lucky. I mean, I don't have any regrets. I don't have a bucket list. I've got to do everything I wanted to do. Somebody pushed me, well, what if you had a bucket list? I said, okay, I'd like a 5-gallon stainless steel bucket because I don't have a bucket. So that's my bucket list.
I'm curious, have you had any, even now, but throughout your life, any existential crisis, anything that you think about, like what's going to happen when my life is over? Do you think about that?
Yeah, I've had some moments. I mean, I remember there was a period of about 10 years where I was depressed. And I finally figured out what that was all about. Because in the course of my life, I've hurt a lot of people. And I feel bad about that, So I had this little moment of whimsy. Maybe I should go back and find them and apologize. And then I thought a little more, and it was like, okay, stupid. So you go knock on somebody's door, and one of two things will most likely happen. They'll say, who are you? Or I'll hurt them all over again. And what's the point in that? So just deal with it, okay? So one day, when I was living in Pleasant Hill, my daughter was living in Placitas, and her mom was teaching in Japan, some college program. And my daughter's going to visit her. So she would stay with me for a couple of days. And her mom had told me that my daughter had said she's never getting married because men are just couch potatoes. And I said, I know she's talking about me. So I sat down with her one night and we were talking, and I said, I want to tell you something. All men aren't like me, okay? I said, I'm dealing with depression, okay? And have been for several years. And so I don't want you to think all men are, just like I am. Well, that triggered something that it took 4 months. And I characterize it as walking out of a fog and I left that depression behind. And it, it was a pretty grand moment. It was 2014, I think. And I have over the years, a couple of times, you have a down moment, things aren't going well. And I felt that pull and I go, no, I'm not going there. I did that. I'm not going back there. So that was probably the biggest. Now, I've had some weird moments. I remember driving down Highway 880 in Oakland by the Coliseum. And if you did that now, it's all lit up, bright. Back then, there were no lights. It was dark. And I'm in the fast lane. And I had a compulsion to move over to the slow lane. Well, there was a wreck in the fast lane, in the 1 and 2 lanes. There were cars all over, but their lights were off. It had just happened, and they were just blocking the roadway. And I went by that. And I was like, wow. Because I can't explain that, I had another time where I was on, there's a street in Oakland, you go up a hill, and it's kind of blind. You go up a hill, and there's a curve. And I'm going up the hill, and I move over a lane, and there's a car coming in the wrong direction. I don't know why I moved over. I have no idea. So you just say, okay. I don't disagree with the thought that got pretty lucky, So all in all, I've lived a pretty good life. If you'd like, there's a little 3.5 minute piece on YouTube that I wrote and performed. I was asked to for Dia de los Muertos, and it was held at a cemetery in Albuquerque. So I decided to write a piece about my mom. My mom had a really hard life. She really did. And I wrote this piece and performed it. If you want to look it up, it's Cemetery Stories, Alan Ramos. And because I realized that as troubled as my mom was, and she was, anything that's good in me, I got from her. I entitled this Exchanging Gifts. And then at the end of her life, she was in a lot of pain, and without realizing it, I gave her permission to die because she wanted to die. And I felt really good about that. It was a strange, her last moments, her last hours. I came to see her because they called me and said, she's in a coma. And so I'm holding her hand, talking to her, and I'm feeling really good about this. It's like she's found peace, good for her. And then an hour after I left, she passed away. So I gave her permission, and she waited. So I've had a good life. I mean, I seem to have an aversion to becoming wealthy. So I don't have any worldly goods to show for this. I mean, I used up all my money to, take that shot at going to be an actor. But, as far as I'm concerned, it was well spent. I got to do what I wanted to do. I live on Social Security very comfortably. And I don't want for anything. So how could I have nothing to complain about. I guess I could find something to complain about if I really tried. But, everybody's got something to complain about. Who wants to listen to my complaints? And, so let's go back to when I came out of that depression. I mean, I realized that instead of going on knocking on doors, just don't do those things anymore. Just be kind to people. Or leave them alone. If you can't be kind to them, just leave them alone. And that works. I mean, I kind of mixed up in that. I came to a realization, for instance, that you go to a restaurant or a conference and you have a luncheon, and the people who are waiting on you are invisible. And I try to make it a point to thank them, because they don't get a lot of things. What does it cost me? It costs me nothing,
Well, I'm glad you came out of your bubble long enough to sit down with me and let me record you.
Well, I'm honored. Thank you.
Maybe we'll take it out on the. I'll link to the video you did of your mom, and or get the poem that you wrote for your mom.
Yeah.
And that'll be how we close out the video.
Oh, that would be wonderful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We'll do it.
Oh, good. Thank you so much.
Alan, thank you so much.
My mom was a bit of an enigma. For those who thought they knew her, she was generally jovial, always making people laugh. She was often the life of the party. For those of us closest to her, she was both loving and demanding. She was troubled, occasionally prone to anger. She was very insecure. But through all of that, she was one of the most giving people that I've ever known. There was always room for someone else at our table. There was always something for someone in need. My mom truly cared about others. It took me many years to realize that all of the positive aspects of my life, such as they are, were gifts given to me by my mom. She was also often guilty of quietly committing random acts of kindness. For many years, she purchased little brass angel pins by the gross. She took them with her wherever she went. She never ran out of angel pins. So whether it was in a grocery store or just walking down the street, if my mom saw someone that looked down or troubled, she gave them an angel pin. That was my mom. Her last months were very difficult for her as she suffered from an incurable condition that caused her a great deal of pain. Even then, she sought to brighten the days of her many visitors. However, her condition did get the best of her. And in her last weeks, she told those of us closest to her that she wanted to die. Now, I reacted like everyone else. And I told her, put your energy into living. I told her that You really don't want to die. On a Sunday in April of 2003, the day after my family and I had moved from a house we just sold, I went to visit my mom. Now, once again, she told me that she wanted to die. For the very first time, I heard the sincerity and seriousness in her voice. And I told her it was okay, that when she was ready, she should go. Of course, her concern was not for herself, but for me, and she told me that I don't want to interfere with your plans. So we were moving into our new home the following weekend. I told her, don't worry about my plans, I'll be fine. Whenever you're ready to go, you should just go. 3 days later, I got a call. My mom had slipped into a coma, and there wasn't much time. So I immediately went to see her. For a bit over an hour, I held her hand and just talked to her. I talked about familiar things, shared thoughts about our path together, just generally reminiscing. Surprisingly, just holding her hand and talking to her, I didn't feel sad. In fact, I had a very good feeling. I felt my mom had finally found the peace and contentment for which she had long been searching. When I realized it was time to let her go, I told her that I loved her and said my last goodbye. Within an hour of my leaving, she just simply slipped away. Throughout my life, my mom and I exchanged many gifts, starting with her giving me the gift of life. She gave me many gifts, however, that were not so obvious, including the valuable gifts of the many values that were integral to her being. On that last day, we completed our final gift exchange. My mom gave me the gift of allowing me time to be by her side and say goodbye. And I gave my mom the gift of permission to let go of life. A postscript. At the reception following my mom's funeral, my daughter, who was 7 at the time, was handing out the last of the little brass angel pins that my mom had ordered. She looked up at me and said, "I think that Grandma is up in heaven handing out people pins to angels." It was the most appropriate thought. Thank you.